Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our fabulous interview today that we have going for our Out for Health resource fair and that we have taken virtually this year. I am joined today by licensed marriage and family therapist Damon Jacobs, all the way from New York City. He is a great author, speaker, relationship expert, and advocate. So I am so excited to have you join us today. And why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, Damon?
Well, thank you, John, and thank you, everybody. I'm so glad to be here and honored to be included in this. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in New York State as well as California. And really, my background goes back to the early 90s when I was living in San Francisco, living in the Bay Area, going through psychology courses in Santa Cruz. And just realizing that I had always been drawn to being a therapist, wanting to be a healer, but that the real life lived experiences and the traumas that we were going through with the pandemic at that point, with the AIDS pandemic in the 90s, was so, the issues coming up were so different from the ones we were being taught about in school, that the psychological traumas weren't about something that had happened in the past so much as something that was happening in the here and the now, and the death and destruction that people were experiencing as they were losing their friends, losing their communities. And that if I was going to be serious in my role as a therapist or any kind of catalyst for healing or hope in the community, it meant doing something different than just sitting on my ass in a clinic all day. It meant like getting out, getting into the streets, acting up, fighting back, or educating, and doing something more to prevent HIV. And that's really informed how I have worked as both a therapist, as an educator for most of the last 3 decades, is just realizing that mental health, HIV prevention, HIV treatment, and sexual health are all intersected to make our lives, that can make our lives very fulfilling and rewarding in a great way, but could also be quite devastating and painful if not addressed.
That's awesome. Well, thank you. We're really honored to have you with us today, and we're just going to dive right into some questions, shall we?
Let's dive in.
Let's dive it. All right. So one of the things, the population that we serve is our Sage of the Rockies program. So working with older LGBTQ adults, they tend to be more isolated. And what are some of the ways that the younger generation can kind of help out with that piece?
Well, so I think it's not necessarily, here's my opinion. I think if we are talking about empowerment within our community, then it's up to the individuals and community to raise that.
Mhm.
I would say that the younger generation, chronologically younger, can certainly be a part of that and can be an instrumental part of that. But I would also ask the question of the individuals and perhaps the families or pods that are in this community, how do you raise each other up? What sort of events, especially during this time in our history with social distancing, how can people be there for each other? How can communities or pods be there for each other? If there's safe ways to meet in person or safer ways to meet in person. If not, how about this virtual platform that we have? How do we support and nourish each other's sense of self, sense of purpose, sense of connection? I think the biggest obstacle that we face in our lives, COVID or no COVID, is loneliness and touch starvation. And that is an issue that usually gets ignored in these conversations, specifically about touch and the need to experience consensual, loving touch to give and receive throughout the lifespan. I mean, we certainly know what happens to babies if they're not touched appropriately. They don't thrive, they don't develop. And I always ask, so what age does that stop? At what age do we not require human touch and compassion to thrive? I don't think it ever does stop. I think whether we're born or in our 20s or in our 80s, we need that. So if or when there are ways to give and receive consensual, loving touch, often it can be erotic, but it's not always. But to give and receive that, that is often how we ascend and how we raise from loneliness to feel connected. I'm also a big proponent of having I'm not saying any one particular, but some sort of spiritual framework or idea of something greater, that our existence is part of something greater as a part of being connected. And honestly, that for me is the authentic experience I have, even when I was in lockdown and 4 weeks so in Brooklyn. was still using breath and energy to feel lovingly connected to the world. It's not the same, but it's still a way to say that, okay, I may not be in a room with other individuals, but I'm still connected to abundant, loving energy. And we can harvest that in our breath, in our spirit, and in our minds if we're consciously working toward that. So these are some of the ways that I encourage communities to help each other, help ourselves, in the virtual world, in the touch world, and of course in a non-COVID world to actually have events, social events, fun events,
Right.
theater, plays, all the stuff we used to do before, this, that we plan and organize that in a way that's accessible for people to be part of and feel included and appreciated.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that's come out of COVID times. We talk about pre-COVID and we're in COVID. It's about that isolation with everybody, but it's folks that were already kind of anxious about getting out in normal times, pre-COVID, to settling in during the COVID times, and now they're completely separated from the socialization piece of it, with even just getting a phone call from somebody, or it is that touch, that sensory piece of it, because for those people that are extroverts and huggers and handshakers and that type of thing, it just becomes a really difficult situation. So bridging the gap, and those are things that people can do through the beautiful world of Zoom and video calls and FaceTime and things of that nature. You still don't have that component of the physical aspect of it, but you do have that visual piece.
Absolutely. I mean, if this had to happen, at least this pandemic in our lifetime, like the first one, the first global pandemic in the last 102 years,
Yeah.
at least happening at a time that we have Zoom, that we have these communicating. And that again, I would say in answer to the actual question, that it's not up to a younger person or a younger generation to make that happen. We make that happen. And if any group historically is positioned to do this, it is us. It is the survivors of the AIDS crisis who, by hook or by crook, we are resilient, we are powerful, we are strong. When I say that I feel connected, even when I'm not in a room with other people, part of what I mean is that I am connected to so much loving energy of people who are no longer physically alive. People I have known, people I have loved, people who have loved me. They're still here. They're still here. And they are still surrounding me with abundant love. And that's true whether I'm in a room with other people or not. And our generation tragically has had more loss than most generations, those of us that survived the AIDS crisis. But that also means that we are resilient, that we have lived through death, that we are, if we have been or loved people who have passed away, that in my opinion, those people are there. They are around us, they are in us, they're feeding us, they're nurturing us. If we are open to that power is there, and it's a very healing power.
It is. Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because it is important for people to remember that, even though we've lost lives during the AIDS epidemic and also right now during the pandemic, it's that thing that they're always with us. Like you said, they've loved us, we've loved them, we've thought about them. You don't ever forget about them. There's always the reminders in life that they're still there, which is a beautiful thing. And like you said, you just have to call on whatever that higher power might be, to embrace you and help you through this time, no matter what that is for you as an individual.
Yes. And I do think when that works out and when that's expressed in a way that's intergenerational, and it can feel like a very rewarding give and take.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like at the 20 somethings that I work with or know personally or professionally, don't know like what this is like. And I can't say I know what COVID is like, but I certainly can explain to them what I just explained to you about the power of surviving trauma and grief when your community is sick, or when you're living constantly with the fear that you might be next.
Yeah.
It does make us stronger. It does make us resilient. Well, I can speak to that personally. And hearing that for some younger people comes a bit as a relief. And so oftentimes there is an energy that can be nurturing both ways, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And when that works out, it's a beautiful give and take.
I love that. So how do you feel that isolation has really affected relationships on a whole? Obviously it's different for every age group, but we're going to focus on our SAGE community. And how do you feel that this isolation during COVID times has really affected our elder community?
Well, so if it's what's interesting is how this lockdown, this isolation, in some ways has actually enhanced some relationships. For instance, I work with a couple in my therapy practice whom I used to see in my office in Manhattan. And due to COVID and lockdown, and due to being at a high risk medical group, these two people, one is in their 70s, one is in their 80s, and they've been together almost 40 years. And in that 40 years, there's been a fair amount of turbulence. There's been some times when there's been smooth waters, and times when there's been very, very choppy waters. And before COVID, there were some very choppy waters. But they went into lockdown together in March. And since then, they have had simple quality time together that they never had when they were busy New Yorkers doing their thing, constantly going to theater, constantly doing this, that, social engagements. They have just been together in a constant, steady, smooth state. Not completely smooth all the time, but they have never had a sustainable period of quality time where the goal is just to be together, read, and play Scrabble at night.
Yeah.
Without being distracted by work, by social obligations. They're cherishing this moment in their history. They're cherishing that they get, after 40 years, this non-distracted quality time together. And in that way, this lockdown for them has really been a blessing. And I have been hearing that from several couples who have been together for a long time, that we've just never slowed down like this without the pressure or obligations to leave the house.
Yeah.
Really unique. Now, of course, I know of instances where it's gone the other way, where two people who are together have never spent this much time together, and it's not working out. It's really, really hard. It's like a lot of couples thrive on distraction and engagement outside the home, and this time of not being able to get apart from each other has been difficult.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, some of the couples I work with are still together, and they know now, like, they've stayed together through, if they could get through this, they are likely to stay together for a very, throughout the long haul. And again, so that's for people that are in relationships. For those that are not in relationships, it's been difficult. Here in New York, we've been practicing a form of harm reduction in order to be together, in order to have erotic touch and sexual intimacy. And we actually do have some guidelines from our Department of Health, our New York City Department of Health, of how to make that safer. It's not going to be safe, but how harm reduction applications to reduce harm. But the fact is, if somebody is in a vulnerable medical category, if they have a history of respiratory illness, and they're in a vulnerable age group, which when we're talking about COVID, we're talking about 60s and above, some of those individuals have been very isolated. And I know some of these individuals, and they're struggling. They're really struggling because they want to be around other people, but they really, really are still concerned that that would make them vulnerable to this deadly virus. And there still hasn't been a clear way to navigate that.
Yeah. Yeah, we're seeing the same thing here as well. And it's, we have our online groups that we do for people to join in to have some sort of socialization on Zoom meetings and things of that nature. But a lot of folks, it's not the same thing. Yes, I can see someone's face, a familiar face, and talk to them, but it's that whole interaction piece, and how do we connect outside of, a regularly scheduled, group setting through another organization to have those relationships that are meaningful and that will hopefully continue and just gain some momentum as COVID starts to, as we start to get the medicines that will help us combat the pandemic and that type of thing. So I love that you have both sides of it and I've seen that too. I've heard the same thing, is that a lot of relationships, like my husband and I, we've been together for 24 years and we've never taken time to slow down. So this has been a beautiful thing that we can just kind of slow down. But then I have friends on the other spectrum that are in the middle of dating and, they're single. And so they feel a little bit lonely, and, you create your quarantine, during that time frame where people are safe, they're getting tested. But I understand also the kind of awareness of being really extra cautious if you have respiratory issues, if you have other pre-existing, and based on it, it really isn't even an age thing anymore, because we see that it's affecting people of all ages, contrary to popular belief. We trust the science, and we believe the scientists. So it's, trying to figure out those ways to navigate what it means to be in a relationship or single during COVID, and how do we build those intersectionalities.
Right. And it's tricky, and I don't know anyone who's got it completely figured out. We're kind of just taking it day by day, given that we clearly don't have any political leadership on this, and we just don't even have any clear medical yes or no's. We have very little that's medically clear. As you pointed out, our understanding of this virus and its impact seems to change or evolve or expand from week to week. So how do we navigate that? It's a really time, and what I'm trying to reach out for my friends who are isolated, or people who are isolated, there does seem to be a reason to believe that we will have a reasonable vaccine at some point, that we will have protection at some point. And if you can hold out, boy, are we going to have a party. Boy, is there going to be fun.
Yes.
You're going to get to make up for this lost time once there is a safe way to do it, and have a really good time doing that. But just hold on for now.
Obviously, self-care is important during this time. And what do you feel are some of the best ways that we can look after ourselves?
Well, for me, this has been an ongoing journey. I am almost 50 now. I'm getting close to 50. And I'd say this process of self-care has really evolved over the last 3 decades. Something I express personally, sometimes something I express professionally. And it kind of comes down to that classic trifecta of body, mind, spirit. Or in my world, it's kind of broken down as power, purpose, and pleasure.
Yep.
So the first part of that is power, or spirit. And I don't mean power like over others. I mean sincere, authentic power that's grounded within. As I mentioned earlier, that ability to experience connected energy, even when there's not other people physically in the same room. And whether that is derivative of one's religious upbringing, or a spiritual path that has unfolded in their own lifetime. It is that experience of being connected to life and having a deeper reverence for life, and by the same exact thing, having a deeper reverence for death, because you can't really respect life if you can't really respect death. But it's nurturing every single day in some way or another, just like a lot of people pay attention to the gym or their physical fitness. Even brushing your teeth is paying attention to those spiritual muscles as well, deepening and nourishing one's connection with a sense of solid foundation within.
Sure.
And that is one of the crucial ways of self-care that I practice, that I encourage and invite others to practice as well. And the second of that is purpose, or what I would also call state of the mind health. Again, what if we spent as much time working on our minds as we do our biceps? What a different culture this would be. But the mindset and the purpose is knowing that we are here for a reason. That you and I and everyone listening or watching this has a purpose for being here. There's a reason we're here to serve the world, to give in some way, shape, or form to others. And we all have unique ways that we're equipped to do that. So purpose is knowing that at all ages, there's a reason for being here. There's a reason to get up. There's a way to contribute. That is a win-win, that is rewarding for you, rewarding for others. And the trick is finding that. And when you're really blessed, sometimes you can make some money doing that.
Right.
But this is the kind of thing that you would do, that you're just inspired to do. There's passion around, even if there's no money involved, that you just want to do anyway. You just want to get involved and do something anyway. That's so important for all of us to experience, especially now, but I think in all stages of life, to experience, like, I know why I'm here. And there's certain moments where I just feel like, yes, that's it. That's why I'm meant to be here right now. And then, of course, pleasure. The body. I think that often gets erased when we talk about aging, is the experience. Now, again, I do mean sexual pleasure, but really when I talk about pleasure, I mean any activity that is satisfying on the physiological level, on the sensational level. It could be anything that brings us a sense of play, anything that some might consider trivial or futile. But really, I think what gets overlooked in this conversation is how important and healthy sexuality is in the aging process, to give and receive consensual sexual touch, to be held and feel important and meaningful and appreciated on that level is essential for self-care. And again, that doesn't mean people have to have sex to be healthy. I want to be clear. For some people, they can be very clear in their sexual energy, and that clarity of sexual energy might be, I don't really want to be sexually active with anybody else right now. Or I only want to be sexually active with one person, which is beautiful, as long as it's something that people arrive at in a way that helps them to experience empowerment and play and a sense of being alive. And if there's ever a time in our history where the experience of living can be enhanced in a playful way, I think this is the time for us to find it, because we're clearly not living in a time historically that's really nurturing that or encouraging that. So power, purpose, and pleasure are the three kind of trifectas of what I think self-care and making the most of this living thing is about.
I love that. Yeah, the 3 Ps.
Yep.
I love that. So on top of that, talking about the self-care, what are some of those warning signs that you would have for folks looking out for their elders in the community, whether it be family or chosen family, about how they're feeling and kind of the signs that they may be giving that they are feeling isolated and kind of disconnected, and how we can help with that?
Well, I think we always want to be cognizant of how depression works.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no standard for that, but often with LGBTQ older adults, it can take a form of withdrawal. And again, how do you discern in these days whether someone's withdrawing because of COVID or because they're just withdrawing emotionally? It's hard to discern.
Yeah.
But to look for other things, to ask if it's appropriate, to ask how someone's appetite has been. Is it more than usual or less than usual? Are they sleeping more than usual or less than usual? Are you hearing them say things like, my life doesn't matter, or talk about devaluing themselves? Are they speaking about themselves in a way that articulates that they don't feel like their presence in this world matters or has made an impact? Are they speaking about their body in a way that's diminishing? And I know how common that is in our culture. The body shaming that we do to others, the body shaming that we do within ourselves is a very common trait. But I call people on that and really ask, is that truly what you believe? I truly believe that all bodies are beautiful. Doesn't mean everyone wants to have sex with everyone, right, but that the human body, this vehicle that we've got, is a beautiful, amazing thing. And let's start from there. But when I hear older adults talk about their bodies in a way that's diminishing or devaluing, or leads one to think that sexuality is not an option for them, that's a concern for me. And I address that concern and try to explore with them the framework for understanding that all bodies at all ages and all shapes and all sizes are gorgeous.
Yeah.
And let's practice that. Let's think about what we do with that. So it's looking for these signs. And of course, if you are concerned, I would also, again, if you're comfortable, talking to someone about if they're suicidal or not, or if they've thought about suicide. Again, that's very, very common in our community. I don't know any LGBTQ individual who at some point hasn't thought about suicide, but there's a really big difference between thinking about it, starting to consider ways to do it, and then actually making a plan for how and where and when it's going to happen. And at any moment on that continuum, one can intervene and step in and try to prevent that. But those are the things that I would look for or be concerned about in a person who might be isolated and might be experiencing a significant depression at this moment.
Yeah. Well, that's great advice. I mean, it's good to know what those warning signs might be, because not everybody may see them or notice them, because it may just come up in conversation where you think that would be a quote unquote normal conversation, but in actuality, they're using key phrases and words to kind of seek help and have people dig a little bit deeper.
And I just, the other thing that I just remembered, that I know a lot of, especially gay men sometimes will try to put a really good face on things. And it's, they're not trying to deceive. They're just that if they act like everything's fine, they'll hope they feel like everything's fine. And sometimes that's a facade. And you can sometimes see a little through that facade if you, again, kind of listen for these cues. Where I've often seen that is in substance abuse. That if someone is saying everything's okay, but they're getting blackout drunk every night, that might indicate that there's an underlying depression or concern. And sometimes that's how I've seen this more clearly in the gay community, is that, on the surface, everyone's like, everything's great, I'm fine. But, the next morning I'm hungover, and the night before I was crying, in my whiskey, thinking about killing myself. Right. And that's a sign that there's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that. This has been a fabulous conversation. I'm so glad that you could join us. I want you to be able to tell people where they can find you. I know that you've written a few books, and those are available. We'll put that on the slide as well, so that people can get that information. But I would just love to give you this opportunity to kind of talk about, how you got started with what you're doing, and kind of the things that you have just done over your career.
Great. I'd love to share more. So as I mentioned, my career began in the Bay Area in California during the AIDS crisis. And most of my work as a therapist or as an educator somehow has been related to HIV treatment or prevention. And I was working in Manhattan doing outreach for a vaccine trial, a national HIV vaccine trial in 2010. When suddenly we were called into the office for this major emergency meeting the day before Thanksgiving in 2010. I'm like, what the hell is going on? And we had to learn about something called the Iprex Trial. And I had never heard of an Iprex Trial. I knew what an iMac was, what an iPod was, but I never, what the hell is Iprex? And why do I have to learn this the day before Thanksgiving? What we were learning about right before Thanksgiving was the scientific breakthrough that a drug called Truvada could prevent HIV by 99% or greater. And that the science was starting to come out, and we anticipated this was going to be a news story. So if you're doing outreach and education in the community, you kind of want to know about that. So when people ask you questions, you know how to respond to that. And sadly, the news never caught on to it. It wasn't really publicized. But I started learning about this drug called PrEP. Truvada for PrEP. And I began using it in 2011 for myself as an HIV negative person who had just turned 40 years old and was pretty much done with condoms at that point, and was experiencing a lot of what we call dissonance about the fact that I had made it into my 40s, HIV negative, but after 20 years plus of worrying about HIV and using condoms, I was experiencing exhaustion and what we call condom fatigue. And a part of my brain was starting to justify that by saying, look, you're 40 now. You live to your 40s. With your family history, you have more to worry about than just HIV. It's like, you get HIV at this point, you're probably not going to die from it. There's many other things to be concerned about. So why not get it over with? And that might sound shocking, but I think you and anyone who's worked in the field has heard people describe their relationship to HIV change from an if to a when.
Yeah.
But when I learned about PrEP, I thought, well, maybe that doesn't have to go that way. Maybe there's a way to have sexual empowerment and have the kind of connections that I want to have without HIV being a factor. So I started using PrEP July 19th, 2011. I've been using it consistently ever since, except I did take 4 weeks off during the lockdown in March. And much to my surprise, in my 40s, I've been experiencing this sense of liberation that I never had before. And it's given me this rush of energy to feel like I want to share this information more passionately, more clearly. It has helped my education work. It's helped my therapy work. And a lot of the last 9 years of my life have been about helping people all over the world understand what this biomedical intervention called PrEP looks like, and how they can get it, and how, if they choose to, they can use this to perhaps heal from the trauma of our AIDS pandemic. Right. For many of us who lived through that and are still traumatized. And then what came along next was the science and the breakthrough that people living with HIV who are virally suppressed cannot transmit HIV sexually, called the U=U movement. That began in 2015. And I'm like, whoa, look at what's happening. If you're HIV negative, you can prevent HIV by almost 100%. If you're living with HIV and you have access to healthcare and you're able to stay on your meds, your ability to transmit HIV to others sexually is 0%, according to the CDC. What happens when we put these tools together? what happens when there's this moment in time where we can have connection, fun, sex, relationships in a way that has never existed, or at least hadn't existed for the past 30 years.
Yeah.
So that is so much of what my work has been about for the last 10 years, is helping people everywhere in the world as much as possible, whether it's been in person or using Facebook or social media, to help people understand what these biomedical interventions mean medically, but psychologically and emotionally as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's so interesting to see where we started and where we've come during all of this time. And it's not been a smooth road. Obviously there have been ups and downs with, different types of drugs and medications coming out that didn't work. And finally the right one came along. That's what I think is such a beautiful thing. And just the work that you do in educating people and helping people through times, especially now that we're in COVID times, is just a really beautiful thing. So I appreciate everything that you do and the help that you give, not only to our community, but to every human being that is, living with a struggle or needs to be educated on what is happening.
I appreciate that. And that is my goal here. Like, now seeing that now that we do have these biomedical interventions, how can we use that as a foundation for experiencing greater levels of pleasure, of relationship, of purpose, of inner power as we get older, as we age up, as this generation that has now survived 2 pandemics, because I do call the AIDS pandemic a pandemic.
Yeah.
And now we're on our second one of COVID, but how historically unique that is in this time for us to have been this strong, this resilient, this powerful. We can approach that as we age, as we get older, in a way that can be so empowering and satisfying. Or what I know is that a lot of people who don't really think about these issues or are subjected to ageism approach these from a place of anxiety and nervousness and fear. So as a community, John, what you and what I and what anyone who is part of this can do is say, we get to pave the road. We get to lead the way. We get to create a path of aging and getting older that will enhance play, pleasure, power, connection, purpose, persistence, all those wonderful words that start with P.
Yeah.
All those things that just really has never been done historically before. And I'm into it. I'm excited for it.
I love that. Well, I can't thank you enough for joining us for our Out for Health Resource Fair that we're doing virtually this year. Where can people find out? What is your website?
So I'm at Damon L. Jacobs. Don't forget the L. DAMON I'm on Twitter at Damon Jacobs. I have been a regular member of a group on Facebook called the Prep Facts group, Prep Facts, Rethinking HIV Prevention and Sex. I created that group in 2013, so anyone in the world could learn about PrEP and have these discussions about overcoming fear and enhancing pleasure. And I'm pretty easy to find. Just Google Damon L. Jacobs. You'll find me yapping somewhere.
Well, wonderful. I'm so happy you were able to join us today. And thank you, everybody out there in InstaBubble and YouTube land and wherever you're watching this. We hope you enjoyed listening today, and check out everything else coming up this month on Out for Health on our virtual resource fair. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.